Thank you.
I have a special thanks for one of our great-grandchildren got baptized yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Cash. He's 12.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
Great. That's great.
Now, you guys didn't, here, let me start that around. You didn't look at Hebrews 12, 14 through 17. Wait a minute. No. The notes for April the 1st here.
Thank you, sir.
Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. No, this was the notes that I had for last week. You can hold on to those. You're going to need a binder by the time you get all of this stuff here. Okay, that goes all the way back to Hebrews 10. I thought we were still in.
Oh, we got beyond 10. I can't remember.
Okay, the back page.
Hebrews,
Back page has
that's Hebrews 11.
Hebrews 12, Hebrews
It's actually,
10.
the notes for April 1st at Hebrews 11, that's the chapter heading is on there.
10.
The back page has Hebrews 12.
Yeah. See, the front page has Hebrews
Back page of
11.
this.
Yeah, but where is Hebrews 11? Why did I jump from 10 to 12? I think that's in Hebrews 11, that roll call of faith. If you look at Hebrews chapter 11, guys, see, where are we here?
Yeah, by faith Abel.
Right.
Noah, Abraham.
Verse 20, 22,
Enoch.
what's it talking about? Verses 20 through 22.
Right. By faith Isaac invoked future blessings on
Yeah.
Jacob and Esau.
These
by
are
faith
examples of faith, aren't they?
Jacob. Right. Right. That's 11.
So, yeah, don't pay any attention to that notation on 10 there. I got hung up on 10 and couldn't get off of it.
Okay.
Okay, but y'all didn't review that last week, right?
No.
Okay. Well, I think that's where we left off. We were in the middle of Hebrews 11. I think we stopped at about verse 19.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right.
Talking about how, where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, and he had enough faith that because God promised him that through Isaac his seed will be multiplied, that if he killed Isaac, God would raise him from the dead because God would keep his promise. And his promise was he's going to have a lot of descendants through Isaac. Abraham didn't believe he was going to lose his son.
Right. Right.
Even if he kills him, God's going to raise him from the dead.
That's a lot of faith.
But verses 20 through 22, Sal, do you want to go ahead and just read those 3 verses?
Sure.
More examples of faith.
By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones.
So he goes back to Abraham, and then there's Abraham's son Isaac. And it's these blessings that the patriarchs bestow on their sons are blessings based on faith that God will keep his promise that he's made to Isaac, to Abraham, to Isaac, and then to Jacob, and then to Jacob's son. And he picks out Joseph particularly, who told the Israelites towards the end of his life, he'd spent many years in Egypt, and they'd all gone down to Egypt, that, someday, we're going to go back to Palestine. Someday y'all going to go back to Canaan. So be sure and carry my bones with you. It's going to happen. He says all of this is by faith. This is what faith, those promises were made, and those predictions about what would happen. Verses 24 through, let's just read verses 24 through 28. Larry?
By faith, Moses, when he came to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect for the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is visible.
And verse 28?
Oh, I'm sorry. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should test them.
So the whole life of Moses, everything Moses accomplished through what?
Faith.
By faith.
Yeah.
This is what faith, he keeps emphasizing, what faith will accomplish. What was it that allowed him, instead of enjoying the privilege of being a prince in Pharaoh's court as a child of Pharaoh, he chose to be mistreated with the people of God? That took a lot of faith, didn't it?
Oh, yes.
To make that decision. Well, it's faith in God, though. It's faith in God's promise to his people. What is it that the implication here is, instead of enjoying the pleasures of sin, why would a person take the hard route, do the hard thing, rather than enjoy sin for a while? Takes faith in God, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Do you really believe in God?
Takes a lot of faith.
Then the pleasures or the ease of disobedience and the way of sin, that gives you the strength, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But if God's not very real to a person,
They're much more apt to take the easy
there's
way
no
out,
faith, right?
Right, exactly.
but he regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as greater value because he was looking ahead to his reward. There's always this future aspect of faith too, isn't there? Which then connects it with hope that God will keep his promise, that God will be faithful. Not only, he says, to believe in God, you must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder, that he will keep his promise, right? That's an important part of faith, that he will keep his promise, that he will reward you by trusting him, following him. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. That's another part of faith he mentioned way back in the first part of the chapter, isn't it? That faith, you look at, go back to the first part of the chapter. By faith we understand the universe was formed at God's command, and what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Verse 6, without faith it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists. You have to believe that he exists even though he's invisible, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And so he continues kind of with Israel's history. Mike, read verses, just read through verse 31. 29, 30, 31.
By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient, after she had welcomed the spies in peace.
All right. So everything that was happening to the Hebrews and being able to pass through the Red Sea. The Red Sea opened up, kind of, if you think about it, here's the Egyptian army bearing down on them. If the Red Sea opens up, what part does faith play in saying we better take this route that's opened up to escape? Is that a sign of saying, that the reason the sea did open up is because these people had trusted God enough to leave Egypt and to be there. And then God made a way for them. Although
they grumbled a bit on the way.
Their faith was kind of wavering, wasn't it?
They grumbled a bit on the way.
And Moses said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord."
Thank you.
That's one of my favorite verses. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord.
Yeah.
How did the walls of Jericho fell down? Because of faith. Take a lot of faith if you're going to try to capture a city just by walking around it.
Yeah, blow your horn.
And then here's this story about this prostitute. She welcomes these spies. They were aliens. I've always wondered, exactly what was it about her being willing to do that? Why would she do that?
This guy knew she was going to be one of the people that Jesus.
Why did she?
Because he probably told her. He probably came to her.
At this point,
sometime.
Trust the God of the Hebrews. These alien invaders.
Very good question.
But it doesn't really tell us too much, except that apparently she saw something or understood something about the God of these Hebrews.
Right.
It was she must have had faith in, compared to the paganism that she had known all of her life. And then, of course, she becomes one of the great grandmothers of our Lord Himself. She's listed then in the genealogy later on. All right, and then verse 32. While you guys are reading, I'll read a little bit of it. Right, go ahead and enjoy your food. What more shall I say? He's reminding his audience, and kind of an assumption here that they understand who all these men are. What shall I say? I don't have time to talk to you. I can't really detail the stories of Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. I don't have time to tell you all their stories. I do have some notes here. Gideon, of course, was a man used by God to defeat the army of the Midianites. Although, and by the way, the faith of many of these people is not always perfect. When the Midianites had captured the Hebrews and had overrun them, was taking their taxes from them, Gideon was threshing wheat, and it says he was actually hiding at the point. He had put the wheat in some kind of a cellar or something to hide it from the Midianites. So obviously he's very much afraid of the Midianites. And And when God, the angel of the Lord, appears to him,
Thank you.
he says, he doesn't immediately say, if you want me to go and lead the Hebrews, if you want to deliver us from the Midianites, that's great. He says, could you give me a sign? He's got, you remember what I'm talking about, the skin, the wool?
The sheep's wool.
The sheep's wool. And what was it? First, he wanted the sign that it would be dry when there was dew everywhere else. And then he said, well, could you make it wet when it's dry everywhere else? Which, shows of his wavering. He says, it's like, is this for real that you want me to do this?
Was he going for 2 out of 3?
So his faith was not, in some ways, was not really all that exemplary. It was kind of shaky. But he finally did go, didn't he? If you look at some of these other people here too, Barak led the people in a victory over the Canaanites in Judges chapter 4. But he was very hesitant to go until he could get a woman to go with him.
Yeah.
So what kind of faith is that you got to have a woman to go with you before you're willing to do what the Lord wants you to do? But he did go. Samson, was used to defeat the Philistines, but he had some serious problems, particularly with women.
Yeah. I wanted
Jephthah. There's some really interesting stories in the book of Judges. I'd kind of forgotten about this until I was studying this, where it mentions Jephthah. You know what Jephthah is famous for? He was used of God to defeat the Ammonites. The book of Judges is this story over and over again, how the Israelites would sin against God, and he would use the Canaanite tribes to oppress them. Then he would raise up someone to deliver them. And Jephthah was the one he had raised up to deliver them. And he made a vow to God when he went out that if God would give him victory, he would sacrifice to God the first thing he met once he returned home. And what did he meet upon returning home?
Daughter.
His daughter, his virgin daughter, was the first thing he met. And she was willing, according to the story, and he actually sacrificed her. Now that's
murder.
I don't know what I'm not sure what you do with that story.
So he said he was going to sacrifice his firstborn. What did he say? The first person that
He said he would sacrifice the first thing he met. Like I suppose he was thinking maybe I'd meet one of the sheep or one of the goats or something that I might happen to run into when I came home. And David, of course, is the most famous warrior in Israel's history. But he certainly, and he was called a man after God's own heart, but he was an adulterer, right? And he didn't do well even with his own sons, Absalom and Adonijah. I have a note down there that tells you about what happened with Absalom. He started a rebellion against his own father, and David was an old man. Was later killed by Joab. Adonijah attempted to usurp the throne during the life of his king. His own sons rebelled against him. And so in some sense, David's own family was kind of dysfunctional, we would say today, wouldn't we? And then, that was after all that happened after Bathsheba. So at least there's one point to be made here that you're taken away. You don't have to, your faith doesn't have to be perfect to make it into God's hall of faith. And you don't have to be a perfect person to trust God. To trust God doesn't mean you are perfect. In a way, to trust God means you realize you're imperfect. You realize your own weakness.
Throughout the Bible, he relied on people that were not, that had faults and flaws.
He didn't have any choice.
No, I know.
That's who we are.
That's who we are. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, when Jesus was picking out apostles, it looked like he could have maybe picked out a little better class than he did. Right? Even the high court, the Sanhedrin, was wondering who in the world are these ragtag, ignorant Galileans?
Smelly fishermen.
You know, who do they think they are proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah? So, but Jesus didn't go to the Sadducees or the Pharisees or well versed in the scriptures, did he?
No.
Verses 33 through 35. All of these people, he says, what did they do? Through faith, they conquered kingdoms. They administered justice. They gained what was promised. They quenched the fury of flames. They escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength. They were not strong, but it's through faith that weakness is turned into strength. Who became powerful in battle and routed foreign enemies. Women received back their dead, raised again to life. There were those who were tortured, refusing to be released, so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. But look what they accomplished through faith. You know, if you trust God, hold on. This is what faith can accomplish. But when you get to verses 39, you see again there is this forward-looking aspect of faith. It has to do with a promise. You don't trust God for what He's going to do for you at the moment. You trust God because He will reward you in the future for being obedient. Verse 39, these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. He's had this big list going all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, and Moses, Gideon, and Barak, and Jephthah, and David, and Samuel. He says none of them received what was promised. God planned something better for us so that together with us they would be made perfect. Here's this word perfect again. Meaning more like our completion, the goal that God has for us. The goal that God had for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the patriarchs, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets. There was a goal, and they don't receive that goal apart even from those of us who are living today, as well as the Christians in the first century. That together, we will all reach this goal, be made perfect, something better. And he's going to be talking about that in the next chapter. Talks about the two mountains in the next chapter. Okay, and then we go over to chapter 12. So, people are inclined to, and we're all inclined to give up. We get tired, wonder, is there ever any end to the suffering that we see? And, so what's the motivation to keep us going? Bob, would you read chapter 12, verses 1 through 3?
Sure. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart.
All right. There two things I think to consider here. This, first of all, is this crowd of witnesses. Who are these witnesses? It's all these people he's talked about here, isn't it? Going all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, the great Hebrews, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Samuel, all the prophets, David, Isaiah, all these men of God. These are witnesses. And who are the picture here is a stadium. And you've got all these people who've gone before you, who've run the race and have persevered, and they're watching, but they're cheering for us. And the Catholic Church talks about the church militant. That's the church that's in the fight today on earth. And then there's the church triumphant. That's the church that's already in the stands. They've already finished their race. And they're our witnesses. Do you ever think of those people as actually watching you? Are you gonna stumble and fall before you finish the race? Are you going to give up? But they're watching. A cloud of witnesses. So, since that's true, if you're going to run the race, when you run a race, people who run a race don't put on big heavy shoes, and they don't put on a big overcoat. They don't put on a lot of clothes. They strip down. In fact, the ancients, back in the first century with the Greek races, they performed nude. They actually threw off every bit of clothing when they ran. So, if you're going to run a race, you don't carry around a load of books or something in your arms and a lot of clothing. But what is it that we need to throw off? What hinders us? The sin that entangles us, that really holds us down. So he says, run with perseverance, perseverance, perseverance. And then the other thing to keep in mind, he says, is not only the people who are watching, the great heroes of faith, but Jesus. Keep your eye on Jesus. The pioneer and perfecter of faith. That's the one thing that can keep giving you heart. Look at Jesus and what he's done for you. What he suffered, how he endured, and what he did for you. The love that he has for us. And the example, of course, he had, the joy set before him, that he endured the cross, set right down at the right hand of God. Consider him who endured such opposition, so that you won't grow weary
You think how phenomenal that love is, how how could we possibly love anyone as much as he loved us? I mean, it's an amazing thing.
So, when you think you've got it hard, being a Christian is a hard life. Look what Jesus endured.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he endured that for us who are sinners when he himself was righteous.
Right.
So here are the two things kind of keep before you. There are these witnesses. Remember them. You've got people cheering for you who are concerned about you. Abraham is concerned about whether you're going to finish the race. He's saying, brother, don't give up.
Good morning, guys.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing?
Good morning.
See you. Yeah, you think about that. That's I know my mom's there because she kept after me for all those years when she was here on this earth.
Yeah, they're I think members of even of your own families
Right.
before
Yeah.
who have prayed for you.
Oh, yes.
Well, so in persevering, one of the issues, I guess, that sometimes makes it difficult to persevere is when, well, anything, this is just kind of logical. When things get tough, when things get hard, when there's suffering involved in persevering, it's awful easy to say, why should I keep on? All I'm getting is this is hard. All I'm getting is more suffering. So why keep on? And so he's going to talk a little bit about the suffering and the hardship that accompanies the Christian life, verses 4 through 13. Our hardship is really divine discipline. So you've got to understand that when you find it difficult to keep going, the difficulties that you're in are there for a purpose. Ken, would you just read that whole text, verses let's see, through verse 11 anyway.
Okay. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. You have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son who he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For this disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful, yet those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness.
Okay. He's quoting again the text. Author of Hebrews is obviously very familiar with the Old Testament, isn't he? Mm-hmm. He quotes it more extensively, I think, from the Old Testament than almost any other writer. So he points out to start with that whatever struggles they have at least haven't led to the point of shedding of blood. They haven't been put to death or maybe flogged yet. they're undergoing some trials, some hardships, but at least he said, you haven't gotten to that point yet. Although many Christians have had to suffer the shedding of blood, haven't they? Prisons and trials. But anyway, he says, don't forget the word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son. Because when the Lord disciplines you, he loves you and chastens you and accepts you as a son. He points out, that it's a sign of God's care for you. Now, I used to, when my mother would take a switch and give it to me, she said, I'm doing this because I love you.
It's going to hurt me more than it hurts you, right?
Yeah.
I've heard that one too.
And that didn't mean much to me at the time.
Oh, lie to the devil.
Although, I guess in some sense, deep down, I understood. My parents did care for me. It wasn't because she said, I love you, but because every night at dinner time there was food on the table for me. And if I was sick, they took me to the doctor. And I needed shoes, they took me to the store and bought me a pair of shoes. All of the things they did for me. So I was willing to endure the hardship. I was willing to endure the discipline.
You say you were willing to endure the discipline, but most children, you don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Well, no, I could have run away.
Yeah, you could have. But for most discipline, you don't really have a choice, and that's true.
Children say, I'm going to run away.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how different children see it differently. My oldest sister she was a psychology major when she got into college, and she really got into the Dr. Spock and all this kind of stuff, and she was convinced that she was abused as a child. And none of us, there are 8 kids in our family, and none of the others felt that way at all, but boy, she was convinced that she was abused as a child because they struck her, and that kind of thing. But it's interesting how they see things differently,
This word for discipline, interestingly enough, comes from the word is paidui, which is related to the word paidos, which means child. Discipline inherently is not a punishment for evil doing, like when a person commits a crime, they're punished by being sent to prison. Now that might serve as some form of discipline to them, but that's not really the point. The point is just to punish them. Purely just to punish them. To achieve some measure of justice or retribution. But this word is not really the word for, there is another word for retribution. And that's not what is happening to us when we're suffering. God is not just punishing us for our sin. Well, you committed the sin, so I'm going to make you suffer. It's not a foretaste of hell. That's not.
Right.
It's and that's the reason parents, discipline their children. We call it punishment sometimes, but we don't do it just, we want to make you suffer to set things right. We want you to become a better person.
Exactly.
What does God want for us? Verse 10. He wants us to share in His holiness. That's the point. that we may ultimately share in his holiness, that we may become more like God himself. There are different translations of this word. The New English Version says, endure hardship as discipline. The King James Version says, if you endure chastening.
Right.
The New Living Version says, do not give up when you're punished. The New Living Word uses the word punished, which I don't like that translation. The NIRV, New International Revised Version, says, put up with hard times. Hard times, chastening, discipline, rather than just the word punishment. It can be translated as correction or instruction. Look at 2 Timothy 2:25.
Correcting his opponents with gentleness, God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of truth.
Okay, say that again.
Correcting his opponents with gentleness, God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of truth.
Correcting. That's the same word here used for discipline.
Yeah.
Disciplining them, correcting them with gentleness.
And the NIV uses instructed, Bob.
Yeah, instruction there. Yeah.
Gently instructed. Yeah.
So when things are going hard in your life or my life, what does it mean? That God doesn't care for us, forgotten us? No. It means he does care. He's trying to achieve something with us, to share in his holiness.
You know, the same action could be considered discipline or correcting, or it could be considered punishing. And I think part of what we're talking about here is faith. We have to have faith that God wants what's best for us, and therefore he isn't doing these things to us to punish us. That's part of our faith, is that we believe he is trying to correct us and instruct us to make us better, to make us more holy, more like him. That's part of our faith. Otherwise, you just look at it all as punishment.
Right.
If you don't believe that about God.
You don't like me, so you're just trying to hurt me because you're mad at me. You don't like me. No.
Because you're not really good. You know, you're not really loving.
There is a sense in which it is a penalty. You know, it's like, if you show up late for football practice, the coach may say, you got to run so many wind sprints because you were late. Got to do an extra 50 push-ups. You know. So in a sense, it is a kind of a penalty. But the whole point is to make you a better person.
Build character. Yeah.
Well, before we jump into the next chapter, chapter 13, which I've already given you a handout on that. Maybe wait till next week before we get into that. Any other comments on chapter 12? Well, let's look at the last two verses here in chapter 12. We didn't really pay much. We need to read those. Kent, you have chapter 12?
Yes.
Read those last two verses, chapters 12 and 13.
Therefore strengthen the hands that are weak and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed.
Okay. So he's talking to the church or the people who are struggling with their faith, and there are certain ones, I guess, who are weaker than others, who are stumbling, who've got feeble arms and weak knees. So he's telling the group to strengthen those people, encourage them, lift them up, and help them, and make level paths for your feet so that the lame won't be disabled. So that if they've got weak knees, make the paths level as you can. Try to help them so that at least, I guess, is he afraid that they're going to completely fall? But watch out for people who are really struggling. That seems to be the message here. You know, watch out particularly for those in your midst who are really struggling with their faith, so that those who are disabled, for those who are weak, will be healed, will be brought back to full strength. Are there people in the church that you know of who are really struggling, who seem on the verge of just giving up? Can you think of some that you're maybe known? I think all of us can if you think of that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's somebody here.
What was the question? I didn't hear. What were you saying about?
Well, you know of somebody who's on the verge of giving up. He seems
I'm that way every day.
every day.
Oh yeah.
Well, what can we do, brother?
No.
Help you.
Get rid of the 9 people in my house. Nah, it's not that bad. But
Well, can you see it? Can you look at it as a discipline from God?
yeah, sometimes I don't really like his discipline. I want to argue with him a little bit.
Yeah. Well, he says that about discipline. It's always kind of unpleasant or painful, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So was that Pete switch I used to get as a kid. That's just not. I can relate to where people. It said, you know, you think people struggle. I mean, some people are stronger than others, and I'm strong in some areas, but not others. You know, so I have to. It's tough. It's tough sometimes.
Well, there's a verse over in the book of Galatians what is that? Where you're dealing with someone who is struggling or who has fallen.
Carrying each other's burdens.
Yeah. There's a Galatians chapter
6.
Chapter 6.
Could be close.
Yeah, someone is caught in sin. If someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit, you restore that person. But do it gently. Here is that need for the right attitude, isn't it? The right feeling, approach. Instead of coming in with anger and pride and contempt, you lousy so-and-so, you know, what kind of Christian are you? Restore the person gently, but watch yourselves, because you can be tempted too.
Right.
Carry each other's burdens, as we fulfill the law of Christ. Okay. As we close, any